that part's out. I still wish I had a GoPro camera on it, so I could record this coming down. Unfortunately, not everything's free, but out of all the ways to treat the biggest fault is welcome to
event. This is really exciting. I'm a professor in the Public Administration Department. I'm chair. I'm also the Associate Dean for the College of Community and Public Affairs, and it's really exciting. Christina Lambright, sorry. And I'm really excited to see these many people in this room. I've been in this room and I've worked at this university for 10 years. I don't think I've ever seen this many people in this room. I don't know if I've ever seen this enthusiasm when I teach a class, so this is really exciting. So for those of you who don't know that much about the College of Community and Public Affairs, we're part of Binghamton University, and we have one undergraduate program, Community Development. We also have 3 master's programs, a master's in social work, a master's in public administration, a master's in student affairs, and we also have an interdisciplinary PhD program. And tonight we're really excited to be hosting this event that is being sponsored with the Press and Sun. And we're really excited that we were included and allowed to work on this event. And so it's being sponsored by the Press and Sun, the Department of Public Administration, the College of Community and Public Affairs. The Holiday Inn has also generously allowed us to park in their parking lot, which is wonderful. Sorry, I wasn't part of the advertising parking crew.
It was in the paper. It was in the paper.
But anyway, needless to say, we're very grateful for them, and I think that this is a really fitting partnership for higher education institution and for the media. When I think about the world today, and I think about, in an ideal world, what are the goals of higher education? What are the goals of the media? And it's really to help people seek truth. And that's what we want, that's what an ideal world we want. But in the environment we live in right now, it's very polarized, very partisan. I think it's really hard to know who to trust. What is fair and balanced? Where should you go to get information? How should you gather it? What steps should you use? And then I think most importantly, what questions should you be asking when you think about it critically? How should you analyze it? How do you weigh different things? And I think that this is really what I hope that our panelists are going to talk a bit about tonight to help you be better truth seekers, to help you just be more acute discerners of information that you may receive, to really know how to sift through it and make sense of what you're seeing, what you're reading, what you're hearing. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Neill Borowski from the Press and Sun, and he will introduce the rest of the panel.
Thank you.
Okay.
The applause really needs to be for BU because we came up with this idea in the newsroom around Sunshine Week, which is in March, where we do stories on access to public information. And we kind of cooked up the idea, and I approached Ryan Nerosh, who's our PR person, not knowing what kind of reaction I'd get. And he put me in touch with the folks over here, and the reaction has been great. And they're great partners. The coffee and tea is compliments of them. The room is compliments of them. So both I and you have a lot to thank BU for. Very, very good. Thank you. I just want to quickly recognize a couple of people. There's a real celebrity in the audience, and she's sitting back there, Valerie Zell, who she angered me greatly because she retired. But she seems to be having fun in retirement, as some of you might be. And she wrote our Life Lived column and a lot of other stuff, and it was just a pleasure to work with her. We had to see her go, but it was so neat to see her show up tonight. So thank you, Val. And we have Kevin Hogan from our staff. Just say hi, Kevin. And Jeff Platsky's over here somewhere. And then Andrew Thayer with the camera. And Hannah Schwartz over here covering the event. So there's a few of us here, and feel free after the event if you want to corner any one of us. It's fine. You can't talk about 7 p.m. deadlines, though. No, don't get me started on that. But anyway, not my choice. The The thing to think about is that we don't want to start this with an untruth. And that untruth is this whole event. You can't really learn how to be a truth seeker in 2 hours. It takes a lot of time. Particularly on the internet, doing research. I taught a course at Temple University to journalism students for several years when I was down in Philadelphia, and it was 2 times a week for a whole semester. So what we hope to do is whet your appetite, give you some ideas, and now with the climate in Washington, etc., is what better time to do it. To me, there's just lies or truths, and people say half-truths, but I'd rather be black and white about it. It's either lies or truths. And there are mistakes. People make errors, and we certainly do, and that's why we have a correction area where we run corrections. But to knowingly lie is really something that I think most of our parents never always taught us not to do, something that is not very nice. In a few years in the business, 1975, I can't think of many times I've been lied to. I think the most oftentimes we do get a lie, and Jeff probably would underscore this, is when, say, you approach a business and they're not ready to release something, like they're closing down or they're adding or whatever, they might try to say, well, I don't know anything about that, and they really do. That's not good, but it's still not a bald-faced lie like we're seeing in some areas now. So we hope to show you how to think about it, kind of the philosophy behind it, as well as show you some sites that we use. We certainly can't show them all. But we've got a great panel, and one of the keys, one of the goals in putting together this event was we didn't want to be all press and sun bulletin people. We think that's important. So we have Sarah Maximiek of BU. She's a subject librarian, and one of her research areas, her main research areas, was access to public information. And she'll be talking about the philosophy of lying and telling the truth and access to information, etc. Then we have Bob Joseph of WNBF Radio. Bob is both an excellent talk show host as well as a very, very good newsman. We have the pleasure of being on his show quite a bit, both me and my staff. And he also scoops us quite a bit, too, on his website. So, but it's a healthy competition. And you'll be hearing in that order. And then finally, John Roby of our staff. He's our regional investigative reporter. And John does amazing work, very in-depth work and amazing research. And his goal is to write about the whole, I guess you would say, the Twin Tiers, but also to write about New York State and really go deep. And he does a fabulous job of that. And then I'll wrap it up at the end. So I'd like Sarah to start off.
So I would like to start off, and if you can't hear me, let me know, and I'll try to talk louder.
Can't hear you. Use the mic.
Okay. This is where my technology literacy comes in. Okay, it's good. Okay. So I would like to just point out that this did start out with a minor lie, and that is that I took Christina's class in research method, and it was very energetic. So I just want to get that out of the way. It was a few years ago, so maybe she forgot. But I personally think that there are 3 categories of news, of fake news particularly. And that is that there's fake news, and that is the news that is based on just inaccurate or totally not true information. There is biased news, which is not the same thing as fake news. So the biased news, and I think this is where it gets really tricky, is it's information that is based on fact, but it definitely has a spin in some direction or the other, and that's perhaps where it gets really gray. And then there's a thing that we don't necessarily think about, but we do fall for very easily, and that is the satire news. So I think a lot of people now have gotten used to, The Onion is probably the best known one, although there are cases where local governments have made policy decisions based on what they find in The Onion, which I always find to be funny. But there are other sites that are perhaps not well known, and they're very well written, so when you see things floating around, you have to know how to check for that. So I just wanted to perhaps start out by rebutting Neill a little bit there. I think there are 3 areas. So I'm going to talk about that all a little bit, and I just need to see the order of my sites here. So on your handout, what we've done there is we've listed all the sites that we're going to talk about, although we're not going to go to them. So this way, if you want to refer back, you can. So I just want to start out with the idea of being able to check your absolute fake news. When you see something going around and your gut instinct says, this is so good to be true, verifying your ultimate belief. And this is something that I think we fall into a lot, because you may really, really feel strongly about something, whether you really love a thought, particularly in a very hot political climate, or you really hate something and you think, yes, this totally backs up what I feel about something. Sometimes that information is absolutely false, and you need to know where to check that. And the 3 sites I have listed there, I think are very good for that. There's Fact Check, and it's a nonpartisan site, so it's very good for political news. It kind of tries to keep track of what is the latest political hoaxes and inaccurate information that's floating around. So if you see something about, Donald Trump has dropped a missile on North Korea, or the Democrats have done this, and you think, wow, that's really amazing, and that totally backs up how evil and corrupt I think that side is, you can check it there, and it's going to tell you if you think if that's going around, is it right or not. Snopes is an oldie but goodie, and I particularly love Snopes because it was actually started by 2 librarians, so I think it's an awesome site. But they have been online since the late 90s, and they check the veracity of everything from email hoaxes that are going around, all those forwards you get. I'm a Nigerian prince, please send me money. You see those all the time. Apple cider vinegar, garlic, and coconut oil will cure all your ills. That's probably been refuted 150 times on that site. So I always encourage people to check that. I will not even confess to the number of times I have been on Facebook and I've just maybe angrily typed out in all caps, for God's sakes, please check Snopes, because I just get tired of things. And I might have actually had to use it a couple of times at the reference desk when I'm working with students, although not in this school. I work at Bartle as well. So these students are awesome, I want to say that. And the other site is Real or Satire. And I use this site a lot, and I feel very funny about it because, in full confession, I cannot find out who runs this site. And I'll talk about the importance of that in a minute. But every time I've used this site, they've given me very good information. So it's confirmation by practice. If you see something going around and you're reading a site and you're going, I really can't tell if this is a decent site or if they're trying to make fun of something or what, type in the URL here and it will come back and say this is probably a satire site. Or this is probably a real news site, but it's very conservative or it's very liberal or it's libertarian or what have you. So it kind of helps you with that gut check. And this is really important because more and more satire sites are coming up. So if you're just trying to get something very quickly, I do recommend this site. It's Real or Satire. And there are more, I think there are still more handouts going around, are there? Yep, so hopefully you'll get some more this way and you'll have all these written down. And really quickly, what I'm going to talk to you before I go into the evaluative part are news and articles, because on top of just looking at your sites, I'm just going to ask for a quick check here. How many people tend to get all their news from one source? Nope, nobody's going to confess to that. That's good. You're doing much better than people of my generation, so I'm very glad to hear that. One of the things that I see, and again, and this is because obviously I work mostly with students, is a surprising number of people in my age group tend to get their news from just one source. Unfortunately, that also tends to be Facebook. And then I also hear a lot, but that's not covered on Facebook. Why is nobody covering this? And I think in order to be an informed news consumer and to be able to think critically about your news, You do need to be able to get you have to be able to get your news from more than one source. And I think everybody should support their local news media. And I don't mean that just because our local news media is sitting here, and I do know other people who work for them. But I think it is important because the more diverse your news sources are, the more points of view you're getting on any story. And what you always want to be able to do is to be able to say, well, these are where these news stories are similar, and this is where they're differencing. Because every single news corporation, every single news reporter is going to have a story with some opinion in it, because they're humans. If they were just writing facts, you'd end up with a bullet list of facts. They have to have a little bit of their personality to go into the story. You just do that when you write. And it doesn't mean that that goes as far as bias. The bias level to me means that when it goes from fact with a little bit of flavor up to a little bit of fact and all their opinion, that's where you start going into problems. So if you aren't switching around your channels, if you're only reading one newspaper, there are other sources that are available for free if you're using the internet a lot, like Political. They're a relatively non-biased source for political news. Google News. If you're seeing a news story and you're only seeing it in one place, type it into Google News. And you may not be able to read the whole article, but you will see how it's being covered in other papers. And that may give you an idea of what the other coverage is. There's Policy Archive, which is a freely available collection of policy documents. Now, policy documents do tend to have a bias in that they're coming from think tanks, they're coming from policy groups, so they're written with that in mind. A think tank will usually have an agenda, a policy group is usually trying to push a policy through. But you can find all these research documents on different topics. They won't usually get down to a local level, but if you're trying to find out topics on gun control, you're trying to find out topics about different prescription drug legislation, you can usually find things there. And their research, they're very interesting to read, and they're freely available. Organizations just go in and load them up. The last thing I want to touch on really quickly is once you've decided to break outside of, if you've been in a bubble and you've been getting your resources all from one site, and you are reading things and you're thinking, I don't know whether or not to believe this, there's ways that you can just quickly run through and say, can I trust this source? One is, and we have a webpage up that's freely available that anybody can go to on our library's website, and our library's website is there. It's called the webpage checklist, but this can be used for anything you're reading, even if you're using a news article. I do want to say for a webpage, you have to be able to determine the authorship. If you look at it and you can't tell who the author is, because anybody can publish anything they want to the web. So take a moment and find an about us, find an author, see if this person knows anything about their writing, or if they're just some guy in a basement writing a blog and who knows what they're doing. You also want to be able to determine the date. Does the date match up with what's given? If they're citing data, does the data match up with what they're given? Are they citing data that's 8 years old? And other people are going to talk a little bit more about the data. But you want to be careful about that. The sources that they're talking about. Like, yes, newspapers have good reasons for citing confidential sources, but they'll say that. We're citing a confidential source. When you get into really iffy territory is when people say, I was talking to this guy and he said, and it's not a man on the street interview, and you're just going, and who was that guy, and why did he say that, and what did he have anything to say about this? And this type of stuff I see shared a lot, and it kind of scares me because it just tells me that people aren't thinking about what they share. And the last thing I wanted to share is the problem with breaking news. I know all of us in this room remember 9/11, right? Does anybody remember what it was like trying to figure out exactly what was happening during 9/11?
Oh yeah.
I can still remember some of the things that the news was coming out with, and it's not a slam on the news, but nobody knew what was happening. And everybody was trying to be the first people to break the story. So even a few hours after the planes hit, everybody was running around and there were stories about bombs on the Capitol building and this was happening and there were more planes coming in and nobody knew. And I think that's gotten even worse because now with the internet and now with every news story and every news reporter trying to be the one to hit that breaking news. I think the Press Connects does very well. I think your channel does very well. I know that WSKG does very well with saying like, we're going to give you more news when we verify it. But if you're just out there trying to Google stories because you want to know what's going on, what's happening right this minute, you get a lot of rumors and innuendos and there's a second shooter and there hasn't even been a first shooter confirmed. There is a really good fact book out there, which was actually an NPR funded project, which tells you what to look for and how do you follow the fast breaking stories. So that way you're not the one out there spreading the false information. And actually a rule in that fact book is there's probably never a second shooter, which I thought was actually kind of funny. But that's what happened.
Right, well thank you. And one thing that we've tried to do more and more of on PressConnects.com is get you to the original source of information we're using. And very often if you read a John story or one of Hannah's stories, you'll see the blue link within the story when it cites a fact, and if you click on the link, it'll often take you to the government website or wherever. The other thing that we've had a lot of luck with, and it just really, to me, it adds to the reading value of the story, is putting up PDFs. So if one of our reporters is writing about a court case and we have the court document, even if it's 50 pages, we can put the PDF and embed it in the story so you can read our story and then go to the PDF and read the actual document. And we've been doing that for a while, but now I think we try to do it even more given what's happening in the political environment, saying, here's our story, but you can read it for yourself here. So we'll be doing more of that. But now we'd like to hear from Bob Joseph and from the radio side.
Thank you, Neill, and thank you for the opportunity to be part of this event tonight. I am very pleased to see such a good turnout. My presentation is going to be relatively brief because I want to give you a sense of what it's like for me to try to discern some things on the radio in real time. Every weekday morning, I show up in the radio studio around 9 o'clock, and I don't know what's going to happen over the next 3 hours. I have some ideas, I have some invited guests. Sometimes it would be the mayor of Binghamton, who is on twice a month. He was on this morning, and I have a bunch of topics that I know I will ask the mayor about, and then listeners also will ask. So with scheduled guests, I have a certain idea how that will go. For other aspects of the program, as far as what the listeners contribute, whether it's by phone call or email, who knows? Who knows what will happen over that 3-hour period? And I have to be prepared to try to respond to all sorts of assertions. Now, if people want to make an opinion or comment on local news or state news or national news, that's one thing. The opinions are relatively easy to deal with. If somebody states a fact and it does not sound quite right, if it doesn't seem like it's something we've heard elsewhere, I will tend to challenge the person on it and say, where did you see that? Where did you hear it? Sometimes the person recalls right away and says, well, that was on CNN, or that was on Fox News, or that was in the Press and Sun Bulletin, or on the website PressConnects.com. Some people have a big problem citing a specific source, especially the more you try to pin them down, and it's, well, it was on the internet all last year. And I said, yeah, I was on the internet all last year too, but I don't recall seeing that. Can you please do a search, and when or if you find the link, please email that information to me. And one of the things that I am constantly doing on the air, and Neill has seen this, and John has seen it too, when I'm on, whether it's sometimes interviewing a person in the studio or talking with a caller, I'm working, could be Google News, it could be checking other prominent news websites, the New York Times website, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, USA Today. There are a lot of traditional websites where I'll work to try to get some information verified. For me, it's working without a net. My net is a 7-second digital delay. So that doesn't give me a lot of cushion if somebody says something and it's completely erroneous and I haven't challenged it. I have failed to a degree. I try, again, we don't have a distinct section of the program where people are just giving opinions, and then this part of the program is supposed to be factual. But I still, if somebody makes a comment about something they saw reported, I will usually be skeptical. One phrase that you might hear throughout this evening is a BS detector. If it sounds like it might have been made up, it very well may have been made up. It just doesn't sound right. Now that doesn't mean that it turns out that it isn't right, but it means that you have to do some further research. What certainly we have found over the last couple of years, whether it's covering election campaigns or some things involving government, we've had many corruption cases. Some of the things that have come across, well, I'll even go back several years with one of my favorite governors, Eliot Spitzer. Now, honestly, when the New York Times broke the story that Eliot Spitzer had some sort of problem, which ultimately culminated in him having to leave early, at first, if that had shown up on anybody else's website, I would have been very skeptical. The New York Times has a very good reputation for sourcing and being extremely careful before they break the story. It turned out to be a very important story. They had their facts correct, and when that broke as just a brief bulletin on the New York Times website, I felt fairly confident to go with it. But basically what we've learned, certainly over the last several years, is almost anything is possible. You have to be skeptical. I was born skeptical. I was born about 2 miles from here at Lourdes Hospital. And I'm sure after the doctor gave me a quick slap to make sure I was breathing and so he could send me on my way, I'm sure I asked some questions like, who is running this place? Who are these sisters? But that's okay. And my mom tolerated it. Fortunately, I started seeking the truth. I think the first source that I used to seek the truth was when I was in kindergarten at Homer Brink's school in Edwell, and the source for the truth at that time was the Sun Bulletin. And my kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Blackwell, always brought the Sun Bulletin from home. I always took the Sun Bulletin home and then read select local stories to my mom, so I was auditioning for radio early. And so that was the start of truth-seeking. But even though I got the Sun Bulletin from kindergarten, we also got the evening press at home, so I was even then, at a very young age, using multiple sources. And I still do so today. I can never get enough information. I think the healthy skepticism I had as a kid, asking lots of questions, that is something I continue to this day. I think it's important for all news consumers to ask questions. Ask a lot of questions, maybe to yourself, but as you look for news online, indeed, ask who wrote this, who's behind the website, do they have an agenda, and always look for even more. Don't stop searching, because there's always more information out there. Even, say, a story, an investigative report that John has done that may take weeks to prepare before it goes online or shows up in the Sunday Press and Sun Bulletin, that is the product of a lot of work. And even then, there's still more information to seek. And it's very important. I will take one question. Former Mayor Ryan.
I have to leave to go.
Okay, and former Mayor Ryan did call the program this morning, and he wanted me to bring this up, and Mayor Ryan, I'll also let you elaborate just briefly, but one thing that he thought would be an excellent idea for the news media would be for the interviews we do, especially the recorded interviews, if they could be posted online in their entirety. And I agreed with former Mayor Ryan, that would be ideal. Sometimes there's some good reasons why they're just not done. Some are technical reasons, some are just the way the interviews are conducted. I told former Mayor Ryan one of the things that their top reporters interviewed President Trump in the White House for about 30 minutes. It was recorded, but they never released the entire recording. Portions of it were off the record. And I found that very frustrating from the New York Times, that the entire conversation with President Trump, and then the other thing I found particularly odd about that interview is the New York Times reporters could not say exactly how many White House aides were in the room. They said at least 6. And I thought, the New York Times had 2 reporters interviewing President Trump. They didn't know how many aides who were, and one of them turned out to be Vice President Pence. But again, it felt to me, and I trust the New York Times, but it felt to me incomplete. I love seeing the series of stories they came up with out of that 30-minute interview. They broke several important stories, but they never released the entire unedited recording. So I think the point that former Mayor Ryan made, I think that's a good point, and I hope at least our station may do more of that, putting more unedited interviews on our website. Did you want to make just a brief comment?
Yeah, just real brief, because I do have to go to another meeting. But the other thing, that being in local politics and growing up in this area and following my father around when he was an FDR Democrat from Fenton, who ran for supervisor up there a number of times, and they would vote for him for Man of the Year, but they would never elect him supervisor because he was a Democrat. But anyway, you know, back then the newspaper business was a different business. You had 2 editions, you had a lot of local writers covering stories in depth. And what really frustrates me, and what I would like to, I mean, I think we're discussing mostly state and national news here now. I really would love to find a way to vet local information, because I hear people get on the radio all the time, politicians, and say things that are blatantly false. And basically, if you don't challenge it yourself, and then you end up, it just goes by the wayside. There's got to be a way we can find to challenge local news still, even though we don't have, I don't know what it is, I'm not sure, but I'm hoping there's a way we can find to start fact-checking local news, because that's part of the part that's not getting addressed here tonight. I don't believe, maybe you have some answers, but I don't think there's enough staff at the newspaper anymore to do that kind of vetting. I remember Woody Fischette and a bunch of other reporters who used to do that kind of political writing, and really if you said something and it wasn't true, they would call you on it. They would, it's just now, it's like somebody says something, and I often find myself calling in Bob Show and saying, what? That is so far off the truth, I don't even know where to begin. And so it becomes a tit for tat, and who do you believe? And so if we're going to get to the truth, local news is, I think, these days even more important in some ways, and I'm hoping that we can come up with some way to vet local things that local people say about government, about statistics, about those kinds of things.
Thank you. One thing that I think is really important, and Mayor Ryan did this in the early years of my program, and it continues today with Mayor David, is every other week they have been gracious with their time, spending an hour on the program, answering questions from me, and also answering questions from listeners, whether they're phoned in or emailed in. And that kind of access, I think, is really important. We have started up a similar thing with the county executive. Jason Garner has committed being on the program once a month, first Thursday of every month, so he will be on this Thursday. So he'll take my questions, but he also takes questions from the average listener, and nobody is kept out from being able to ask a question directly to an elected official. That's the sort of thing I would like to see more of. think that helps people, at least at the local level, who really are seeking the truth, at least for the local officials who are willing to participate. One of the problems is some local officials are not that comfortable with the format, which I've had conversations with Matt Ryan and Rich David, and one thing they definitely agree on, they don't understand why any elected official doesn't take advantage of this program, which affords them an opportunity to speak in an unedited way. And yes, they occasionally will be challenged by their constituents. But I think in this country, that's exactly what we need. I think every community, whether you're talking about the city of Binghamton or Broome County, or at the town level or villages, I think you really need to be able to hold your elected officials accountable, not in a bad way and not in a mean-spirited way, but in a way that I think that is part of the responsibility of an elected official, not just to run for office every 2 years or 4 years, but also to be routinely accountable to your constituents.
Hear, hear.
Hear, hear.
Will there be questions for the panelists, or at the end, or
There will be questions and answers, and for former Mayor Ryan, I think I made an exception because I know you have to go later. So that's essentially an overview, and later, if you have questions for me, I'll be glad to answer.
We will have plenty of time for questions. A good point, releasing the interviews. I guess you don't put up your interviews, right?
Right now, we are not routinely putting up the interviews. We hope to rectify that. But ideally, what I would love would be to have a podcast of every hour of the program, so people can not only hear the interviews with elected officials, but even if they missed a segment with phone calls or whatever. Right now, we have some technical limitations, but we are working to get at least most of the major interviews on our website on a regular basis.
Many of our interviews we do are quick, over the phone, 2 minutes, getting some information. One thing we have tried to do is we do something called the conversation with, or 5 questions for, and we record that and generally put the whole thing up. So the conversation with may be only 50, that you see in print, might be only 50% of what actually was said. But if you want to tolerate the long interview, you can sit there and at your computer or on your smartphone and listen to the whole thing. And I think we'll be seeing more and more of that because there's nothing to hide. It's a little more work, take a little more resources, but there's no reason not to put these things up. So now I'd like to welcome John Narobi, who I work very closely with, and I know I sound like a big fan of everyone tonight, but I am. And John is not only an excellent investigative reporter, but John is also very good at what a lot of reporters aren't good at, and that's taking maybe a million record database and going through all the data and looking at it, and we call it interviewing the data rather than interviewing an individual, and coming up with some great stories or proving facts, proving thoughts right or wrong. So welcome, John, and I think you have some things to show us.
Thank you. Maybe show, depending on time. But while Bob was speaking, it occurred to me, I remember the expression, I think it's attributed to Mark Twain, I don't know if it's real or not, but something to the effect of how a lie can travel around the world before the truth gets its shoes on, right? And it's kind of ironic that in this day and age where we are better equipped to check the facts behind a statement, so much misinformation seems to get around so well. So what I wanted to talk briefly about is developing a data state of mind. This is a phrase that has some currency in our field here, and it's one that the last time I was at the Investigative Reporters Conference that our company sends many journalists to every year, there was this whole panel about developing a data state of mind. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that. And the point here, and the reason this fits in with the discussion we've been having, is that on many of these sites, on this handout that you all have, are sites to more or less raw data. And this is a way to get past some of the filtering that happens, as Sarah pointed out correctly, in any news news story. Simply by choosing what facts to include, there is a bit of filtering going on. So when you want to check out the veracity of something, my advice is always go to the data. And this is what I've tried to do in the past certainly year or so that I've been in this different job. So I want to talk about two things that I would suggest you do when you are trying to think about whether a claim that you hear from an elected official or coming out of Albany, one of the agencies, or your friend across the fence there that's making some sort of truth claim that you wonder how true that really is. And I would encourage you to think about what kind of data might exist that can support or refute this claim that's being made. I'm going to do a couple of examples of this and show you how you can do that. Data itself, keep in mind two things. Data is only as good as the methods that are used to collect it. And I'll say it again. The data that you look at, the data that I use to report out a story, is only as good as the methods used to collect it. Every bit of data that's collected by a government agency, a nonprofit, think tank, whatever, there are certain steps that people, real fallible people with a budget, with a deadline, had to go through to collect and publicize. Every data set is going to have some strengths and some limitations. The other thing to think about, so that's one, think about methods. And the other thing to think about, and we'll go through all this just briefly, is whether the data that you are looking at is actually answering the question that you want answered. And because that is a more fraught question than maybe we think about. So I want to draw your attention. I thought maybe we'd project this. I don't think we're going to do that. That would be really unnecessary. On this handout, there's a section called Unemployment and Business Data. And there are 3 links there. Now, to the first point there, the point that you want to think about the methods used to collect data. Something that we pay a lot of attention to, and because many of us on staff at Press Connects are just interested in this, partly because it's a pressing issue here, partly because elected officials, especially at Albany, like to talk about it a lot, is jobs and unemployment. So we spend a lot of time thinking about what's happening with jobs and unemployment, what sectors are increasing and rising, what policies are in place or might be in place that might push some of these trends one way or another in different parts of New York State. This is something I've paid a lot of attention to. So on this sheet, there are 3 websites under unemployment and business data that get at the question of how many folks are working in Broome County and what jobs are they working at. But those 3 sites, and there's 3 of them there that I gave you, because all of them approach that question a little bit differently, and all of them can be used to answer slightly different questions about the bigger issue of jobs and unemployment. So again, just bear with me here, because I think there's a good point. What you see are 3 types of unemployment or job statistics that are collected by both either the New York State Department of Labor or the U.S. Census Bureau. And one of them is what's called the Quarterly Census of Employment and Wages. One of them is called the Local Area Unemployment Statistics. And one of them is called the County Business Patterns. Now, when I say that you got to think about the methods used to collect the data, I mean that very seriously. Those 3 measures, although they all purportedly, well, not purportedly, they do. They measure folks that are working. They do them in different ways. And so the first point about this, when you're thinking about how data is collected, think about whether the data is a sample or whether it is a count. And when I say think about it, what I really mean is find out, because you can find out. You ask the question of the data set. So of these 3 here, what are called the local area unemployment statistics are interesting because they are not a count. In other words, when the folks with the DOL who are out there trying to come up with the monthly unemployment rate in Broome County are trying to figure out how many folks are working, they don't go out and count folks in the unemployment line. They don't go out and count folks behind the machines or behind the cash registers. They call up a sample of residents of Broome County and say, hey, did you work last month? Yes, great. No. Did you draw unemployment? Yes, great. No. Then we're not going to count you. So a sample is it's a statistical method of trying to take a big population and figure out how many people fall into different categories. You can think about it like a big kettle of soup on your stove. You want to know what the soup tastes like, but your soup's got a big chunk of cabbage, it's got a big piece of chicken maybe, it's got some tomatoes, and it's got some broth. When you sample, you're not tasting each little piece to see how each little piece tastes. You're taking a spoonful of the broth and you're saying, because the broth tastes like this, the whole soup tastes like this. This is a sample. A count is when someone who's looking at unemployment goes out and says, one person working, one person working, one person working, one person not working, one person never been working, one person working. That's counting. So these three statistics count the number of folks who are working in different ways. The trade-off here, it's not that one is better or that one is worse. It's not better to count folks or better to sample folks, but you're going to get different kinds of data. So one of the good things about the local area unemployment statistics, this is the data set that every month the State Department of Labor says, hey, unemployment in New York State's down 0.1% and more folks are working than have ever been working before. They love to say that. That's all based on the LAUS, the local area unemployment statistics, the sample. The good thing about this, and I know Neill Borowski can say some bad things about it, the good thing about this is that it's really quickly reported. So every month, you got a pretty good sense of how many folks are working in different counties and different metro areas of New York State. Because it's a sample, it's fast, right? It's way faster to call up a small subset of folks in an area and ask them if they're working than it is to go out and count everybody. So it's quickly reported, and that's a really good thing. It's good to base policy decisions on. In some cases, it gives you a good benchmark, so you can say for the past 23 months, unemployment in this area has gone up or gone down, whatever. The downside is it's not super precise, right? Anytime you sample anything, there's a chance that you might not have made a good sample. You've seen a presidential preference poll, for instance, right? We all saw this, we all went through this the last year, and we said, oh, like, look, all the polls say this, and all the polls say this, and this outcome is certainly going to happen. We forget that there's a thing called a margin of error, right? Whenever you sample, there's a chance that the folks that you happen to call up that day aren't representative of the whole body, and that's what a margin of error is. So with these really quickly updated, fairly good statistics about who's working and who's not, the trade-off is that number is not super precise because we're sampling folks, we're not counting them. The other two measures that are on here, and the links here are directly to the actual raw data sources. The other two are actually counts of people. They count people a little bit differently. So one of them happens to include government workers, and one of them excludes government workers. One of them includes farm workers, and one of them excludes farm workers. There's complicated reasons for this. But it's all laid out very clearly so you can understand what's being counted and what's not. The other two are actually counts. They do these, folks with the Census Bureau or the DOL, they go out and they look at reports from every business with employees. And they say, how many total employees did this business have this month and this month and this month? And they add them all up, and they're actually a solid count. There's no margin of error there. The trade-off is they're slow. So the really, really gold standard count of the folks in the United States who are working and who are not, who are working in different sectors and who are not, and how much they make, the gold standard, the county business patterns, is on about a 2-year lag. They just now released the numbers for 2015. Just last month I wrote a story about it, right? So the best, most precise data out there, the data that's collected with the most reliable and precise methods, are extraordinarily slow. And that's the trade-off. So when I say you want to know about the methods used to collect your data, this is exactly what I'm talking about. I'm talking all here about employment, unemployment, but this is true for any data source that you got, and your handout here is full of them. All these reputable sites are going to be very clear about how we got these numbers, where they came from, when they were collected, and the good ones from the Census Bureau, for instance, are going to say, and these are the people that are not included in the data. Not that any of this is good or bad necessarily, that's a value judgment, but the fact is when you're trying to answer a question like, hey, is agricultural employment in Broome County really increasing like some elected officials have been saying lately? Well, you can go to the source. You can go to the local area unemployment statistics and get last month's answer to that question. Or you can slow your jets a little bit and say, I want to get a really precise number, and I'm going to look at the data from the Census Bureau, which does have this, but I have to be comfortable with the fact that it's 2 years out of date, right? So again, data sources, when you're trying to develop a data state of mind, you're trying to find numbers to back up a claim to truth that you hear, be aware of how the data are collected. All right, please.
And going on to this, now you know we only do a census every 10 years. It's a tremendous outtaking. They're still trying to produce data from the last census, and will be probably straight up to 2019. So when you're reading things that are collected from just the census, population and demographics and things like that, you will also sometimes see mentioned in the American Community Survey, or otherwise called the ACS. And that is the Census Bureau's attempt to keep the census data updated between the 10-year census. But that is also sampling, as opposed to the decennial census, where a lot of that data is meant to be as close to a head count as we can get with the population size that we have. So it's much of the same problem.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. The ACS numbers are very useful in some cases, but again, we are always cognizant of the fact that this is a sample we're looking at. By any chance, could you open the, on the crime data, the second link there, it ends county_totals.htm. So to go to the second point, I'll deal with this more quickly. When you're thinking about data and whether you found a source of data that can answer a question you're trying to. The second point I mentioned is what you want to ask yourself is, do the data really speak to the question that you are trying to answer? Yeah, that's the one right there. Yeah, could you just open that? I think it's a control click, yeah. This is a long build-up. It'll be worth it, I promise. I hope. Now, can you open the Excel for Broom? Do you have that ability? Perfect. And just make it as big as possible if you can. I'm going to see if this is, we didn't actually dry run this, so this may not work. We'll see. Again, is the data you're after, is it actually addressing the question that you are trying to find out? Yeah, good, this is perfect. Okay, and I want to talk about crime a little bit. This is definitely a fraught topic. So if you want to know, for instance, whether a particular area is safe or not, that's one question. If you want to know whether people in a particular area think that they are safe or not, that is a very different question, right? And so we kind of conflate, oh, what's crime like in a place when we report these stories out, and I've done it. But I think we would do better to be a little bit more precise in the question we're asking. What do the data show? And then a totally separate issue is, what do people think? And this is actually quite timely because of the recent news out of the city of Binghamton. So I wanted to talk about crime here. We can get to the first question with solid federal data. The second question, how do folks think? That's a little bit harder to do. So really quickly, I'd like to look at this. What you see here, this is data from the FBI that they collect every year on what they call index crimes. And index crimes are sort of the 7, 8 most common or notorious violent and non-violent property crimes. And this data is put out yearly by the FBI. This is linked on the New York State, on a New York State website. It's right here in your handout. And it's sliced a couple of different ways. So what you have here is the different agencies and their sort of 5-year tally of the reports of the different index crimes. Recently, I looked at this for kind of a bigger Monday story. What are crime rates in New York State doing? And like nationwide, they are falling. I mean, there's no question about that. The rates of crime are falling, with the exception of a couple of big cities and 1 or 2 index crimes in a couple of specific geographies. And that's just the way it is. Interestingly, and lots and lots of research shows this, and talking to folks shows this, and the nasty emails I got after I wrote the story shows this, that people are just absolutely convinced that this is not the case because, hey, my car got broken into last week, so it's definitely like crime's on the rise. But I guess the long and short of this is that you know, if it's another example of a question that can be addressed with data if you are precise about how you frame your question. And this does not just apply to crime data, it applies to any sort of data that you could look at from any of these sites that are linked here. You should ask yourself these 2 questions. One other interesting thing about this that I'd like to point out. Does anyone notice anything unusual about any of these reported crime totals? And I'll give you a great big hint. It's one of the violent crimes. and it's in the years 2014 and 2015. Anybody notice anything unusual? Rape went up incredibly high. If you look at, let's see, rows 12 and 13. This is Binghamton City PD. 20 reported rapes in 2014, 37 in 2015. And if you go down the column, and if we scroll down, you would see that that same trend is reported over and over again by every agency. An apparently extremely high increase in rape. Does anybody know why?
Redefinition.
The definition changed. Okay, so in 2013, the FBI, which is responsible for collecting all this data from police agencies, I want to be precise in my language. You know, I don't think I can do that. And any way I'm going to say it, it's going to be biased. As Sarah pointed out, I'm going to say updated, the definition. So previously, there had been a relatively narrow definition of what constituted the violent crime of rape, and it was interpreted by many law enforcement agencies to apply specifically to female survivors or victims, as you prefer, and to not include a number of offenses that would be sort of categorized as lesser level sexual assaults. Starting in 2013, the FBI clarified to police agencies that it wants essentially any sort of sexual crime involving males or females as the victim survivor to be reported under as an index crime, as a rape index crime. So what that means is a couple of things. First of all, that jump isn't real, right? So every agency in the United States didn't experience up to 900% increase in rapes between 2014 and 2015, the first year the data were reported this way. What it may mean, and there's a lot of sort of criminologists who go back and forth on this, is that the 2015 number is what the 2014 should have been like, and the 2013, and the 2012. In other words, it was picking up for the first time a more accurate definition of the number of rapes that occur reported to different agencies. You could look at that different ways, but that's not the point. The point is, if you looked at these data and you said, wow, crime is definitely down, the rate is down, but oh my God, rape is up, and this is really bad, right? You're not actually right, because there was a change in the data and the way they were reported. And the only way you know this is if you happen to look at the disclaimers that are all over, to their credit, New York State sites and the FBI site, explaining this difference. If you missed it, and you were reporting out a story about this huge jump in rapes, you would be extremely wrong, right? Because there is a change in the data. It also means that, unfortunately, the data aren't comparable, right? Because the definition for how they were collected changed. So there's maybe no way around this, but from now on, you're never going to be able to compare the rate of rape in a jurisdiction before and after 2015. If you see me, because again, when you're thinking about data, you got to take this step into consideration. Are the data comparable, right? Were they collected the same way? It's a big deal. I did see a hand. I'm happy to. Yeah.
A solution to that, it seems to me, would be for a certain number of years to collect the data both ways and show old method, new method, so that you can compare.
For the folks who didn't hear, the gentleman suggested it would be nice if there could be old definition or old data and new data. I paraphrased you. Some jurisdictions were able to do that, and in some cases you will see maybe an asterisk or bullet point and say, under the revised definition, we think in 2014 there may have been this many reported. And you do see that on occasion, that is true. It's still kind of an estimate, and it's older data. But that's a very good point, and some folks have thought about doing that. Yes, sir?
John, when you're looking at collecting data by taking a subset of a much larger population,
yeah.
Even if you have a perfectly representative sample, what concern is there now, especially these days, with controversial topics, that the respondents, for whatever reason, may not be reporting the truth?
Yeah, the question was what is the concern that when you're sampling a larger population, the respondents may not be telling you the truth? And this is, I think, not to put words in your mouth, but I think you could say this is the 2016 election problem, right?
Yes.
I mean, yeah, and he agreed. So I am not a pollster or a statistician, and boy, I'm glad about that. But I know that a lot of those folks are scratching their heads about some of those questions and looking at sampling. You want to sample folks who are similar to each other and also different, right? And so I think that there's some revision going on about the geographic nature of sampling, because there's evidence that folks are clustering in different ways, and as we know, people who clustered in the same place tend to have the same opinions on many, many things. I know that Nate Silver, for instance, has written quite a bit about this, how we want to revise our sampling methods to deal with this apparently sort of new clustering that's happening.
Going forward, they may have to change their techniques.
I hope they do. So,
The other part of that is if you've ever been sampled, the questions are sometimes so skewed that you can't really answer it honestly because they don't give you the right choices in the sampling. In which case, I often hang up at that point. But and then deal with that. You know, if it was a true
obviously skewed questions, and yes, some polling organizations definitely have an agenda, and a reputable poll, and we report them occasionally during election seasons. We do like to link to the questions themselves, so folks who see the results that we report based on their results can look at the questions themselves, and that's a very good point. It's a good service, I think, to our readers.
John, if I could add, I got involved in poll design in Indianapolis at the newspaper there, and it's a real art to design these questions. And we would get a poll results back, or survey results back, and we'd inevitably have to throw away 2 or 3 questions because it's obvious that the question was answered in a way that we didn't expect it to be. Not the answer itself, but we confused people with it. So it's a real art.
But I'm not talking about confusion. I'm talking about choices in the answers, the way the question is phrased.
Wishful.
Well,
then they're trying to slant the poll.
Yeah.
And the thing is that if you go, there are organizations like Pew and Gallup that you can go online and some of their polls, a lot of their polls are locked, but you can go online to their websites and you can see a fair amount of their polls, and they tend to be more neutral. So at least you can see what a good
ones that you get a phone call.
Yeah, but those are usually from political organizations, and they have an agenda. And I will admit, I usually don't answer them either because I just get annoyed by them.
Or I skew the polls by answering by lying, you know.
And hopefully they have. I mean, survey design and poll design it's an academic field of study, and hopefully the people that are trying to sort through that data know what they're doing. We would hope that they're just not having a bunch of people that don't know what they're doing that's trying to figure that out. But
well, the point you make too about whether you want to participate, that's a huge situation. And these days, I'm convinced that so many people of all ages just no longer want to volunteer their opinion, especially when they're contacted at home. You're busy. And sometimes you don't know if the person who's calling is actually who they say they are. They could sound like a legitimate pollster, maybe it's a scammer. I think people are so skeptical. I think it makes coming up with usable poll results today very, very difficult. It's also difficult to get a fair sample because so many people now have cell phones which are not easily accessible for a lot of the polling organizations. So it's becoming, I think, increasingly difficult to get anything approaching an accurate sample.
There's 2 gentlemen with hands up over here, but I wanted to see if we want to do this, or Neil, did you?
Why don't we hold on
I'm done.
and take them at the end? I mean, we'll have time.
You 2 guys, I see who you are. We'll get to you first. Is that okay with y'all?
I have a question even before this finishes up, if you don't mind.
Sure. Yeah, we'll get to you.
It's been really interesting about data collection and using and polling and all the rest, but it's nothing about truth seeking, and I was really interested in truth seeking. I'm wondering if there's going to be some addressing truth seeking as opposed to data and news collection.
Okay. Implicit in my point was that the numbers that are here can be used to evaluate the truth claims, and maybe that's naive on my part, but that's kind of where I was going. But I think Neil might have some things to speak to that.
I think that the topic is how to be a truth seeker, and the goal is to arm you with some ways to do it, to be able to find some data or websites that will help you where you didn't have this before. John's point's a good one. I studied at Temple with the in economics with the economists from the Bureau of Labor Statistics in the Philadelphia Regional Office. And we used to talk about the local area unemployment survey. And she told me that within the BLS, those are referred to as the lousy numbers because they're so bad. And but when you work with statistics, particularly government statistics, you also have to say it's the best we got. So if they're horrible, if you know that something isn't right, you don't use them. But generally, it's the best you've got. You kind of work around it and try to get people to comment on them to see if they're really showing what's happening. I want to show a couple of sites, and then we can take questions. Let me. I guess I can just sneak over here. One of the areas we're building up on PressConnects.com is data.
Hot mic. You're too hot.
Too close?
Too close.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Thank you.
It's a hot mic. I thought you were commenting on somebody in the audience. So if we go here, there we are. But if you go up to more, and then New York data, what this is it's a cooperative effort between us, Rochester, which is one of our sister papers, Westchester, Poughkeepsie. They're all USA Today Network or Gannett papers to put a lot of the publicly available data up. Even when you go to a place like the Census Bureau, which tries really hard to make its data available, sometimes it's hard to burrow in and really find what you need. So our goal is to make it easy to look things up. One of our favorites, and I think one of the favorites among a lot of our digital audience, because it gets used a lot, is the restaurant inspection database. And we kind of promote it on our website and say, check out your favorite restaurant or kind of look before you leave. But if you look at, let's just look at Broome County. And then to do a normal search based on, let's look at critical violations, which are the worst. So, you have, I heard some news out there. Well, that was in March, so that's not good. But one of the points about restaurant inspections, and you can use any one of the top ones as an example, it's a snapshot. They went in, there was a problem, they're still open, so they weren't shut down. So to say that today they have, look here, 31 non-critical and 6 critical violations, it might not be true. They might be perfect now. It was called to their attention. And again, they might not be. So this is an important database. If you click on it, you can get into the details and find out what the problems were. And it's fascinating. Truth seeker, yes. Well, it's one way to get at the information. I'll give you another example here. State employee salaries. It's all public, and
out of date too.
Yeah, a lot of data are out of date. It lags. It's a lot to pull the data together. But I guess top of the list is $750,000 for the dean of the Downstate Medical Center. So the data are there. You might want to go through it and check it out. I have several sites on the list. One of the interesting issues is going to a government agency and then trying to find the data that they offer. A good example is, I'm going to put the mic down one second. So if you go to the New York State Education Department, when you look at it, it's a little daunting. Where do I get information? Where do I get all the data? And actually their data are not offered directly through NICET.gov. It's actually a subset. So you need to type data.nicet.gov. Not found. Okay, bear with me a moment. I'm going to go back to my cheat sheet. So it's not its own website, but if you go down here, you can see, here's, one second. So here's the data page. You can see data.nicet.gov. So my point here is actually, it's easy to go to a website and to look at it like the New York Education Department and say they just don't have the data. There's nothing here to look up. But you need to kind of ferret around in there to figure out just where it is. And this is an example of the Education Department data. It's actually a pretty neat database. You can go down and get down to even the school level, school report card, assessment data. I don't want to bore you with all the particulars, but it has a lot of information, and it's there. But the problem is, and I really don't believe they're trying to hide it. You don't put this kind of investment in offering the data and try to hide it. I think that the web is such a tangle that it's hard to get the point across that here are the data. A lot of people go to the education site for other reasons. So there are a lot of sites like that. On the list, I included environmental, which is a concern. You can find that kind of the brownfields in your backyard. One of the areas that I've looked into a lot over the years are charities or nonprofits. You can go to the charities site with New York State and find out a lot about them. But you can also go to a site called guidestar.org, which used to be pretty much free altogether. Now they're starting to charge, but you can still, when you sign up, you can still get the Form 990, the IRS form that nonprofits must file. Even though they don't pay taxes, they have to file an informational form. That's a public form. You can see that. And it's on guidestar.org, or if you go to the nonprofit, they have to furnish it to you. And that has all the information on their revenue and their expenses, and also shows what their officers are paid and their top employees are paid. So you can find out a lot about a nonprofit organization. So there are a lot of sites like these. Again, I mentioned at the outset that you can spend a semester teaching this twice a week, and I did. And at the end of the semester, I still felt that I didn't arm the students with everything that I should, that there wasn't enough time. And we're kind of talking about ways that we can make this information more available. John certainly does stories every Monday on data and other information, but do we write more about where you can find the information, and not so much a news story, if you will, but really a guide to going after there and getting the truth. So, okay, well, it's 20 after 7, and I promised more time to answer questions. So why don't we start? Did someone back there that the other hands up before? Go ahead.
Yes, I'm very impressed with all the ways you've collected facts and data, but I really want to hear, honestly, I really want to hear something about truth. And all the facts in the world don't buy you one iota of truth. And the reason I say that is I'm an old fart now. I'm 67 years old, but when I was 13 and they killed the Kennedy, right? I think the truth is it wasn't that guy in the window. That's the kind of truth I'm interested in, not crime statistics and all that kind of stuff. I'm interested in truth. And I really wanted, is that Sarah, the gal who's the librarian?
Yeah.
You mentioned that Facebook doesn't give you the news, and I just wanted to make one point, because I got a lot of points I want to make. Facebook never, ever pretended to give you news. What they are is everybody's little, piece of Fox here, ABC there, alternative news there. My daughter is department head at Wall Street Journal, okay? Separate altogether. I worked for the Press and Sun Bulletin. I built your IT department. Not a thing here I heard tonight had anything to do with the truth. And I really wanted to hear about the truth, not data collection. The truth about 9/11, Kennedy, Oklahoma, whatever. The moon landing. You see, I was 19 when they landed on the moon. And only a few years ago,
Do you think they really did?
True. Excuse me?
Do you think they really did?
No, I'm pretty sure we didn't. I'm pretty sure we didn't. And I worked for Link for many years believing we did. I believe we did until a few years ago, and then I looked at the evidence again and realized I've been snookered too.
It's interesting the things you see. I mean, is Kennedy's still alive and living in Lincoln, Nebraska? I don't know.
No, he was killed November 22nd, 1963, but not by a guy in a window.
And some truth we'll never know. There's some things that no matter how much a journalist digs, they'll never know. We've talked recently
about that at all tonight.
We talked recently about crooked politicians, and of course we don't have any around here, right? But ones we've encountered over the years, and I think there's a sense that politicians don't take payoffs anymore. And do they? I don't know. But there are some ways you never know. You'll never know. You know, the brown bag with the cash in it left out in the seat of the golf cart during a golf match. How do you find that out? How do you know? How do you seek that truth? That's a tough one. But anyway, more questions? Yes?
Hi, I'm John Lashalskis. I've spent $107,000 in my own pocket to be on internet radio for 7 years. Example, Public Radio International won't take my phone calls. I get a busy signal, and if I have to get through on another line they won't let me speak. An example, Black Lives Matter kills people. You go up to that website, and my brother-in-law is the chief of police in Norwich. He is not no longer the chief of police, he's retired. But he verified that gives the numbers, it's 80 to 1 of blacks killing blacks compared to 1 cop killing a black. We don't advertise that number.
Shut the fuck up!
And we don't advertise that number.
Let's just all talk and listen.
No!
We'll give you a chance in a minute. We'll give you a chance in a minute.
I'm done here.
That number,
You fucking white people have gotten off with way too much shit. That fucking piece of lie? No. No. Ignored white people.
Goodbye.
I gotta go.
See ya.
Thank you. Now that creates a situation where your reporters report factual numbers, but that number's not being reported unless you look on a different website per se. The police know it. The police need control of the radio programs to say, okay, we have it's the pig. I can't think of the name of it for finances. You know, shoot the pig or something. Anyhow, when it gets said and done, they can put something on the radio. If they're not putting that on the radio, statistically, there's a high number of killings in that segment of the population in certain areas. It's not everywhere, and it doesn't make everybody bad or everybody good, but that's the number. So anyhow, that's not being reported. It's just like free energy. If you go to the website byronline.com, you can pull up patents. Patent on the pole carburetor at 205 miles a gallon. Patent number is 2,026,798. It got 205 miles a gallon on the Sherman tank. First perpetual gravity motor was invented in 1710. It takes me 2 minutes to tell you how to make it work if you're interested.
Sir, I'd like to just make a point that anybody can file a patent. It's just a proof of the conception of an idea. It doesn't have to prove that it works. Just to make that, sir, just to make that point clear about your patents. So I think we need to just go back to what I started out with, which is the idea of you have to be able to verify sources, and you have to be able to, as was pointed out with your radio show, if you're going to talk about statistics, make sure that you can verify the sources of the statistics other than just having them on the internet. And I think because we're running close out of time, we have a half hour left, maybe it's time that we take more questions.
Was the FBI covert activity against American citizens? Pull it up to 1,000-page documents.
Sir, I know we're going documents, but let's move on to other questions.
One thing I have a great deal of difficulty is finding out information and where to find out the information about really local elections, which is school board members and so forth. If you want to vote intelligently, where do you get information about? I mean, nationals no problem, states no problem, but if you go down the line, the information seems to disappear. and it's very difficult to be an intelligent voter. Where do you get that kind of information?
I can answer that a little bit. I agree, because I have the same problem. I live in the village of Johnson City, and it can be very difficult. One place that you may want to check out is the League of Women Voters, and you may not be able to find it online, but just call your local League of Women Voters office, and that is something that they try very hard to do. They do actually reach out to all the local candidates, and they do ask them for their stance on different issues, and they're a nonpartisan group. And this is what I would really recommend. If the League of Local Women Voters say that they can't get any information on a candidate in your area, then call the candidate up, call their campaign office and say, please make this information available, we need to know. For school board, usually your school board will send out, your school district will send out a newsletter. I know I just got mine, and it has all the candidates and the information on them, so to pay attention to that newsletter can be helpful. They usually send it out in print.
And most of the school districts, not all, but most of the school districts do put that information on their websites. You may have to do a little digging, because some of the websites are not very well designed. The other thing too, though, as far as local government websites, it is a problem. I know the President's on Bulletin has been examining this issue, and we have here in Broome and Tioga counties a range of some fairly good government websites, and we also have a lot that are in need of serious updating. I mean, the internet now has been around for a long time. In my opinion, what is going on now with some of the local government websites, it's inexcusable. Their information is not updated. Information about recent meetings, recent planning board actions can be months out of date, and it's very sporadic. And I think it's incumbent on people to encourage their local officials. If you live in a village or a town or the city of Binghamton, or if you're concerned about your county issues, whether it's Broome County or Tioga County, encourage the top officials and the members of the boards to take their responsibility seriously and put timely information on their websites and redesign the websites in a way that the average person can find this stuff without having to spend 10 minutes trying to hunt for it.
And since we're all being truthful here, we used to do a much better job in the newspaper of having election guides and things like that. We've debated this over the years, and people like Jeff probably smile and Kevin probably smile, because it's an ongoing debate in the newsroom on whether anybody is actually reading down to that level. We used to publish many pages of headshots of the local village board candidate or whatever, maybe a comment on what they hope to do if they get elected. And very honestly, we didn't know whether many people were reading. How many people do look closely at those kind of articles in the newspaper? Okay. Okay. I mean, this advises me well, and you know, I think this is something that we can talk about in the future. Yes?
I just want to comment quick before I ask my question. School board meetings are open to go to, and if you've ever gone to some, there's hardly anybody there. So if only the complainers go, then you don't get any other topics discussed or questions asked. Okay, that being said, to get back to truth seekers, if you say find out who the author is or who wrote the article, if I don't know the person, can you tell me, like, how do I know that person's reputable?
Google their name.
Yeah, well, what do you look for when you Google? Like, how do you know it's a credible person?
It depends what you're talking about. I mean, if it's a reputable newspaper, you know, you're looking at the Press Connect, you're looking at New York Times or whatever.
Microphone.
I'm sorry, what? Oh, sorry. I'm used to not speaking in front of one, obviously. So when you're looking at a newspaper, you can usually fairly easy find out what their bylines have been in the past. So what other articles have they written? So most newspapers, even small ones, you know, you'll easily see that he's their data guy. And in the past, I know he used to cover a lot of local government. So you'll see, you know, and then they have the sports person, and they have the person that deals with education issues or crime issues. And it's frightening how many of these people I actually know. But you'll see this sort of thing come up, and that tells you that at least they're familiar with those issues. if it's a case of just a random website, you can sometimes they'll be nice enough to tell you. I'm going to pick on a gentleman in your row, George Holmesy. He has a website, and I know when you go to it, eventually you will find his name. You'll find his co-project person's name, and you will clearly see that we are professors at Binghamton University in these departments. And given what their website it's on a neighborhood sustainability project, it makes perfect sense. And sometimes it's as far as you need to go. So if it's an organization, then you want to pay attention to the about us. What is the organization about? Maybe you want to look at their board members, because you want to see, like, do these people have connections? Like, this is a Coal is Great site, and then you find out that the board members, you know, are all on Exxon Energy Board. You begin to think, this may tell me about the bias of the site. So, and sometimes maybe you just have to Google them and you can't find out anything about them. Okay.
Well, I don't know how many of you use your tablet or use a smartphone when you're watching TV. I know that each morning I tend to get up around 6 or so, maybe a little bit before, and watch CNN and watch it for about an hour or so, and I'll see people on there, and I'll immediately go to Wikipedia, which isn't the best source, but it's a first stop, or Google a person, because I want to know more about who's trying to tell me that. Where do they get their opinion? What is their education? And all that. And I'll do that. But, you know, it's a point well taken over here by this gentleman, that being a truth seeker is not easy. It takes a lot of work. But it's better than being gullible and taking everything as fact.
What do you do when, like this truth seeker, when you hear the president say things that you know are blatantly false or misrepresented, and there's nobody challenging them for it? And you know yourself that this is not right, this doesn't seem right. It's like it doesn't meet the plausibility test. Or, you know, misinformation, or going back on a campaign promise of some sort. I mean, you don't know if you're going to get a straight answer or not. So how do you combat that as a private individual?
Well, you have to be aware. What I see happening in the last year or so, even though there has been a lot of attention at trying to do fact-checking. I think during the presidential campaign there were a lot of efforts at fact-checking all the candidates. But because of what developed over, I'd say, the last year or so, trying to make it sound that the mainstream media was the enemy of the people, I think a lot of people have now come to the conclusion that the people who work for the known name brand news organizations, even if they've been around for decades, I mean, the press has been part of Binghamton since 1904. They've been a part of our community since April 1904. We've been part of the community since 1925. New York Times has been an organization since 1851.
But they're discredited.
Well, and that's the thing. We're in a crisis right now, and we're in a dangerous time. In my opinion, this is a very dangerous time, because there's likely to be something that happens in the weeks or months ahead where the world, and Americans, but the world, 8 billion people, are going to rely on the truthfulness or truthiness of our president. And you have to be able, say, what happens if there is a real conflict with North Korea or a real conflict with Russia? Can we, the news media, report accurately and factually what is really going on, or are we going to have to rely on something that is on Twitter at 6:30 in the morning and then come to find out that the information was not accurate? It is a difficult time, and these are difficult. I mean, trying to really ferret out the truth is difficult.
But even when you tell the truth, half the population doesn't know.
When that's exactly true, and I encounter that on a daily basis. People think that a lot of what, if I read something out of the New York Times, that because it's New York City and the New York Times, it's the liberal failing New York Times, and they must be making it up. And one of the problems too is every news organization I know of has indeed had problems, has had scandals in the past, and because of that, I mean, look, the New York Times had Jason Blair, and they had several other relatively minor things. The Washington Post had Janet Cook. Every reputable news organization and every small news organization from time to time has had problems because we employ humans. We're capable of making mistakes, and sometimes people do have an agenda. Jason Blair was reporting for the New York Times, ostensibly from various locations around the country, when he didn't leave his apartment. Now it's astonishing, and it went on for a long time, and it wasn't discovered for a long time. It's always going to be a black eye for the New York Times. So every day is a new day. Everybody has to really work to maintain, and in some cases, re-earn credibility. There is no simple answer to your point. I acknowledge it.
The answer is to support online those organizations like the New York Times, the ones that you believe in. Support them, get their pay to belong to them, so that they can continue to do what they're doing and fight for.
Well, and that's a good point, because journalism isn't free, and
democracy isn't free.
Exactly, and unfortunately now we have at least 2 or 3 generations of people who think all contents, whether it's music, movies, video games, or information, should be free, because so much of it was available for free for the first chapter of the internet. But people have to understand, to pay for a newspaper, pay for Press Connects and the New York Times, it's an investment in our democracy.
The average person can't take care of all of these things. We have to rely on the organizations that we believe in, and we have to support them as much as we can monetarily, because we can't get that fragment.
Yeah, we could do a whole seminar on the business model for the media now, and it's a tough time for the media. And I don't know what it's going to look like 5 years from now. I hope the media is around.
I have a question. What is okay, the Binghamton Press has been around since 1904. So what is the press and other people in the same position as the press doing differently today about seeking the truth versus back then? Were they seeking, I know that the internet wasn't around. Maybe that's part of the big problem. The way I see it, in the early days, there were more boots on the ground. Investigative reporters, big-time fact-checking, people to check up on the previous investigative reporter. And today, I think because of money and the problems, especially the business problems created by the internet created a lot of business problems for people like the newspapers. All the newspapers that closed up, all the investigative reporters that don't have jobs, all the reporters that should have jobs and doing boot on the ground kind of work, doing all this fact checking, looking for the truth.
There are a couple points.
Where is that?
Well, I mean, one of the things is we have far fewer people than we did in the past. That's a given and kind of over here. But how are we using them? That's the key. Most of our newsrooms, USA Today Network and all, we are required to have a number of investigative reporters, more than we had in the past. And I kind of smiled when you were talking about years ago. I mean, I started in the mid-'70s, and that was a time of kind of stenographic journalism. You'd go to cover a town board meeting, and it would be he said, she said, and you thought you were doing your job if you had your notes right and just presented it, and there it is, without being questioned. I've seen it change over the last, probably 30 years, where we question everything. And if we go to a meeting and cover a meeting on a big topic, we're questioning everything everybody's saying. So we have become more critical of the issues. We're not stenographers anymore. But at the same time, you're absolutely right. This has played out over time where our newsrooms have shrunk dramatically in number.
if I could just jump into, I would also say just to caution that the past days of newspapers were so glorious. I mean, you know, probably not long before you started, seeing a woman in a newsroom that wasn't covering society was extraordinarily rare, and much before that, someone who wasn't white, extraordinarily rare. I mean, so there have been some, the changes have happened in a couple of different directions too, just for what that's worth.
There was, I mean, in many ways, some...
My question is there more accuracy today or less?
I think there's more today, to be honest with you. I was a City Hall reporter at a small newspaper, daily newspaper in Connecticut, and it was my first year out of journalism school. And then getting TV sets from the mayor, as it was in the past in some places. I got out of that place really fast. Other questions? Back there.
My question is, apart from you trying to seek us the truth, are you fair? The media in general, is it fair? I ask you as a Muslim and as a follower of Islam, why you sensationalize the news? I'll give you a few examples coming from international to the local, all the way to Binghamton. Like whenever there is terrorist activities in Europe, it is front page news. But whenever there is terrorist activity in Muslim countries like Turkey, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iraq, you name it, it's just very, very small news. Even though there may be 10 times more people who must have killed. Okay, that was the international thing on fairness. Then after that, when I call the media, Press and Sun Bulletin, this ban thing is going on, do you want to interview Muslims here? We have Muslims from all those 7 banned countries. You don't show. And on the other hand, even if there are thousands of miles away, if there is a terrorist activity, you want to come to Islamic Center to get the Muslim reactions. Okay? And we invite media all the time for Muslim festivals. They don't show up. And we invite speakers of national and international repute, not only at Islamic Center or whenever there is something going at SUNY Binghamton. You don't show up. Why is that? Hanan Ashrawi was here, Amy Goodman was here, Alison Ware of AmericансNew.org is here. We call you, we send press release, you don't give that, that kind of information. Why is it so? Are you fair?
On the international question, I agree with you.
If it bleeds, it leads. You can do a news story on how Muslim children, how women are coping in these times of hate.
Right. Well, I think that, bias in the news was mentioned earlier, and I think when a lot of people think of bias in the news, they think that the story I write, there's bias in that story, but there can also be bias in the news in what they choose to cover or not to cover. And I agree, there are things I want to read a lot more about. Now, it sounds like I'm making excuses, but what we focus on is the local news. And what's that? No, it's local. But what we also try to do is encourage people to write in too. Do a letter to the editor, write an op-ed, etc.
It's not the same thing.
Go ahead.
It's not the same thing. He's asking you why you don't come to the invitations that you get.
Understaffing.
Well, send me an invitation. And Borowski at Gannett.com. It might be just going into an email queue that is filled with other things. I mean, I'd love to see the invitation.
I just think it's real simple. The people, unfortunately, not enough people want to read about the good news. They're looking to read the sensationalism, the bad stuff. And the good stuff, they don't want to read it. So the newspapers and the media, they cover stuff that the sponsors are going to sponsor because of the people watching, the viewers.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, but when we look at our digital numbers from PressConnects.com, yes, the biggest, what people seem to want to read the most is the murder, the horrific accident. That has the highest numbers. Well, we also see high numbers about pregnant giraffes. We see high numbers. Katie Sullivan, who writes about people and tells heartwarming stories. When she has her stories in the paper, those numbers digitally go as high as the latest murder. So we try for a blend, and we don't like presenting only bad news. John, did you?
Oh, I was just going to say that far and away the most read story has been Katie's profile of the family at the Animal Adventures Park and the troubles that little girls face. It's a great piece of journalism, and the readers consistently come back to it and spend lots of time reading it. It's amazing. I wish they would do that with my stories.
Work a giraffe in. I would, sir, I would encourage you to send some invitations to me. My email address is bob@WNBF.com. I don't know that I can attend many events, but we certainly can do better to publicize the events on our program. And I try to have as many guests on the program over the course of a week or a month. I sometimes have reached out to the Islamic community, especially after there have been incidents that are somewhat sensitive, trying to get reaction or balance, and some people have been reluctant to come on the program. And I have found that frustrating, although, and I've had some conversations with people off the air, with people explaining why at certain times they don't want to be on the program. But I encourage people to reach out, and I really would work to try to have a much better balance on our future programs.
One of the things we spoke about earlier was stories versus data. And one of the things that we encourage in public policy work is having stories told about issues. So we need more than the feel-good stories. We need the true stories of how the issues that are affecting us are affecting us. And so I'd like to see more of those kind of stories.
And John's kind of the one to talk to on that. He tries that every Monday with interpreting the data and saying what it means to you. One of the things we try in the newsroom a lot, we have 3 questions we ask: what, so what, and now what? And generally the best stories at least attempt to answer all 3 of those questions. Other people, anyone who hasn't, yes?
Just a couple of comments and then a question. So one of the things was, gee, there's a lot of data out there, what's real and what's not real, and I think people are coming to the realization that, you get what you pay for. There's a lot of things out on the internet, but in terms of high quality journalism, both at the local level, and you mentioned the New York Times several times, I think there's been a recognition that, you need to support these news organizations. We need to support these news organizations, and I would just say, by the turnout in this room, I think there's an awakening of people understanding that it's not all free. There's a lot of fake news or maybe not appropriate news, but you go to some good sources, and that's one of the ways that you can get good information. So that's one comment. The other comment is on the links and Press Connects. I find them to be very useful. That's one of the. I also get the paper, but it's it doesn't have the links in the paper, and they're so long. I'm kind of glad to be able to go out to Press Connects and just click on them. You have a bunch of good resources here that you've given to us. Boy, if we rattle off, hey, you can just go here and here and here. We don't have the same ability or depth to be able to do that. So I know you're not going to make an article full of links, but to the extent that you can put appropriate links in there, at least personally, I find them very valuable.
One thing that I've been talking to John about is the possibility of how can we be more inviting to our print readers as well as our audience online, and saying, drop us an email and say, where do I find out more about X, Y, Z? And then we'll do a little bit of research and figure that out, maybe get help from BU Library and all, and look into that, and then publish the answers to those questions. I think there is that thirst.
And so my question a little bit. So the question I did have, though, was really a restatement of the one that Ryan had, is how do we vet local statements by politicians? And at the national level, there's a lot of people out there doing fact checking and a lot of times almost instantaneously, but at the local level. I know when we got into some of the elections, there was the League of Women Voters, and that was a good piece of information. But statements by politicians, that's probably not the same source that's going to be able to vet those. How do we, as a community, go out and get facts in those areas?
Well, that's a big challenge. One of the things I've had extended conversations with Matt Ryan about are, at least as far as my live radio program, he wants me to fact check in real time. And he is more familiar. During the 8 years that he was in City Hall, he can tell me how much money was spent for a certain city department, or compare a trend, say what the city is spending today versus what it was spending 8 years ago. I don't have those statistics, and I've also pointed out on a radio program, it's not going to be very compelling. They're probably on a radio program, if we were comparing what the city was spending, say 12 years ago versus 8 years ago versus today, there would be 2 or 3 people interested. One is the current mayor, and the 2 other people that care are former mayors. When we start talking about specific numbers and trying to fact check things in real time, it just doesn't work. People, especially on radio, can't follow. Now, as far as newspapers having databases, now that is more useful because people do have the ability to spend some time at their leisure when they're focusing. And a radio program to do what former Mayor Ryan would like, I would have to stop, I think, an interview with the mayor, the current mayor, or someone else, and sometimes after every sentence or every 2 sentences say, well, wait a second, based on what I've got here from the 2008 budget, that's not correct. I can't do it, and I won't do it. That's one thing he would like to be done. That's unrealistic. There is, I think, a greater need for databases. I wish, for example, the city of Binghamton and Broome County and other local governments would have extended databases so you could compare budget trends over, say, a decade or even longer. Most of the current information, whether it's fiscal information, crime information, if you're lucky, they have the most recent report, but they don't keep the archived information on most of these websites, so it becomes very difficult for you to find out what the true numbers are. Say if somebody says something today on my program, you can't go to the City of Binghamton website and see for yourself if those numbers are accurate.
It is impossible to check all facts. We haven't even touched on the FOIL law, but when the credit card scandal came out with Debbie Preston, you FOILed for a lot of documents. And what you were doing is checking both what she was saying as well as her accusers. And you found out some things that hadn't come out.
Does everybody know what FOIL means?
A Freedom of Information law.
Thank you.
And it's not our law, we use it a lot, but it's your law. And it's your access to public records.
Something?
Go ahead.
Okay, if you're talking about going to this email site and that, how many people don't have computers? I have a problem called dyslexia, so I cannot use a computer. Now, I called the press this morning. I was put on hold for an hour, and I figured they do this so they don't have to talk to you, and I finally hung up. I get more information from this London newspaper than I get from your press, and I subscribe to the press.
So I do want to make a point, and I realize that it is increasingly difficult if you don't have a computer or if you're not.
There's a lot of people that don't.
Right, but I do actually want to make a point. If you don't have a computer, you're not familiar with using one, I'm going to actually ask somebody from our audience to stand up. Steve, can you please stand up? And I warn them that this may happen. Please take a moment to speak to this gentleman here. This is Steve Bachman. He is the director of the 4-county library system, and it's a little complicated to explain the library system. You can sit down.
No, I've gone to their classes. Like I said, I have dyslexia, so I can't.
Well, and I understand the dyslexia might be a little bit more difficult to work with, and I understand that. But just in general, if you do not have your public library card or you're not familiar with what your library may offer, please talk to him, because at one point or another, he's familiar with all the libraries across 4 counties. So he will talk to you about them.
Is this what you're talking about, my library card?
Yep, and if you ever went in to try to use to meet with a librarian and see if they can help you get settled with the computer?
Like I said, I won't be able to use it.
Okay.
When I was in school, I would have to have people talk to me.
I am just speaking in general. But another thing too that you might be able to talk to somebody about would be, eventually, if somebody could talk to you about the possibility of getting tablets with, you can get reading software that would do a lot of that work for you. But that would be the sort of thing that you could talk to a librarian about in a public library.
The press would answer the phone.
That I can't help you with.
Anyway, I called because I was looking at the sports section. Nothing about the rumble ponies or whatever they're called.
Well, my number is in the paper. If you look, and you're welcome to call me. I do get calls. I get several calls a week. I know Kevin Hogan takes a lot of calls from people saying that their paper wasn't delivered, etc. And I've been waiting 3 hours on this line or that line. And what I do is send a simple email to our customer service department, and it gets attention. So feel free to call me. I can't be a customer service department, but I do want to retain you as subscribers. And quickly, the point that
I have to go up to your office if I want to talk to somebody,
well,
because nobody answers the phone.
well, you can call our numbers, and if we don't answer, we'll call you back. But your point is well taken about computers, and when we started with PressConnects.com and we started talking about our earlier deadlines and all, I took a call from a woman in her 80s, and she was highly offended that we would suggest that she has to go to a computer. She says, I don't own a computer, I'll never own a computer, and I count on the print paper. And I appreciated that argument, but there is a generational thing here, if you will, and some people do not want to use computers. Yes?
I want to say that NBF, the Press and Sun Bulletin, they all do a pretty good job collecting the local news and data. They've been doing it real well for years, and it's gotten better and better over time. I appreciate that. However, I think I have a theory, because I've been in the biz. I mean, I built the IT department for the Press, right? And I have a theory that the more important the story is, the less it's likely to be covered. That's my theory. And hence, the most important things going on aren't just the labor stats or the crime stats, but the most important things going on are never discussed at all. And if you try and bring them up for discussion, whether it's Kennedy or the moon landing or 9/11, you get shut down. And to me, that's what truth seeking is about. Not how to collect the data, but how to get to the bottom of some of these big stories that people have very divergent opinions about. We haven't talked about that at all, and I suspect that's not on the calendar tonight.
Right here, you've had your hand up patiently.
Hi, Bob. Tony from Binghamton.
Hi.
I call him occasionally.
A little louder, please.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm a bit soft-spoken usually. I'd like to make 3 points. One, I think there's an additional level of news that fake, bias, and satire. I think there's another called slanted news, where you have, it's presented in a way that makes whomever you want look bad. I do have a question for Neill. I haven't been on Press Connects very much. Is there a lot more content there that's not covered in the paper because of print limitations?
There's links.
Generally, what you see on Press Connects of the local news that we write about is going to be in print. But what we do add to it are stories from Rochester, Poughkeepsie, Westchester, stories from sports stories from USA Today. So in total, there's a lot more on Press Connects than in print. But we're very diligent about everything local that we do gets in both.
Okay, one more item I'd like to bring up, in somewhat support of our 2 gentlemen over here. Okay, the moon landing, things of that nature, perpetual energy. I would say build it if it works. then great. You have to look at not just the one site, but sites that are against what you're talking about. You know, you have to look at the multiple sources. You can't just look at one side or the other. You have to look at as many sides as you can, because that's the way you're going to figure out, okay, the people that say the moon landing didn't take place, okay, well, what are the people saying that are against the people that are saying that? You know, what's their evidence?
That's how you are a truth seeker. Really.
That's what you have to do. And unfortunately, sometimes it's a little difficult. I downloaded the from the Binghamton Clerk's office the rules and regulations for the city of Binghamton, updated to 2006. 1,500 pages in PDF. I have not finished reading them. If you can't put it on a 3x5 card,
I think I want to thank our guests before too many other people leave, because they have done a phenomenal job tonight, and I think. All the information was shared, the great questions that were asked, and just the different views that were expressed. And I mean, I think we may walk away with different opinions from this meeting, but I think we all learned a lot, and I really just appreciate the vibrant participation and just insights from our panel. So thank you very much.
And thank you for taking an hour and having your time.